Welcome to the Northland Bassin Podcast with fishing guide John Myrie and bass tournament angler Ken Melander. On the Northland Bassin Podcast, we cover everything bass fishing for both largemouth and smallmouth here in the Wisconsin Northland and all across the northern tier of Midwest states. Hello, folks. I'm John Myrie, and welcome to episode 12 of the Northland Bassin Podcast. I'm sitting here today with co-host Ken Melander, and we've got a special guest in here. We've got fishing guide Noah Glitto in here today, and good to have you guys on the podcast here, and we're going to be talking about bass fishing and a lot about technology.
Yeah, we're going to try to cover old school versus new school using technology to progress the sport of fishing in general.
Well, and Noah, good to have you on here. It's the first time you've been on here.
First time on the podcast. Good time, good guys. Really high quality anglers here in this room.
Well, we're going to talk about the bass fishing and technology. That's the big thing, man. I'll tell you what, the fishing in general has changed tremendously. I've been as a fishing guide 45 years, and I've seen where we started out with very little compared to what we got today, and now it's incredible amount of technology we actually use out there in the water.
Yeah, you think back, Lowrance had the green box flashers, and then Humminbird Super 60s, Super 30s came out, and then Markham came out with a color kind of a dial, same thing as a Super 30s.
The color selector thing, I remember that.
And then Lowrance came out with a paper graph where if it rained out, you're cabooshed. So technology has come a long way, especially now you can just watch the fish grab your bait.
I had all of it in my boat, too, at one time or another, I think.
And I'm sitting here in a room with two guys that are talking about all these different old-style sonars that I never experienced. I had no clue what they even were. That was before my time. I grew up in the land of side imaging coming out, 360 coming out, forward-facing sonar coming out, more advanced mapping coming out. All the different 2Ds and the flashers and stuff, that was all before me, And these guys will tell you about all the fuss that, 2D sonar and flashers put up when that come out and live and cameras, color cameras. And now I'm in the world of where guys are fussing about the forward-facing sonar and the 360 and the more advanced imaging that we're getting now.
Well, and they say, I've heard a lot of people complaining and call it a cheater box and everything else with forward-facing sonar or live scope or whatever you want to call it. But, I maintain that that's not the biggest thing that's advanced us. The most important thing that changed fishing was the high-definition lake maps. Without those lake maps, the sonar doesn't mean that much, really.
It does save you a lot of time. One of the best graphs that I ever run across back in old school was a Cytex CVS 106. It was a liquid crystal display that was pretty fast, and it had multiple colors, and you could really tell the difference between hard bottom, soft bottom, what type of weeds. It give you enough definition. You could tell the difference between cabbage and coontail, but that takes a lot of time to travel around to weed lines in different parts of the lake versus a graph. I mean, you can just look at lake maps now, and you know where all the flats are.
Well, lake map alone, you sit in your office and pull up your phone. Like I get that One Boat Network app on my phone from Humminbird, and you can sit there and look and highlight different depth ranges, and I can pick out the inside turns and the points and the places they're liable to find the fish. And I mean, you're up on that technology a lot more than me or Ken. I don't know. You're in that generation where you grew up with that stuff.
You can get pretty techie, and you can sit like you said, sit on your couch, watch TV, and find spots on your phone, and you can just link it right to your boat. So right when you jump in the boat, all them spots you mark that you want to go check, boom, 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 you go check them all. And at the maps, you can really just run all the spots quick, and go from this spot to this spot and go, the fish weren't in 18 to 7 to 15 today. They weren't on this style bottom. Now I'm going to move to this. Oh, I'm getting them in like 12 to 8 now. And you can look at your map and you can go highlight 12 to 8. So you look at that 12 to 8 highlight and go, it's about, 100 yards wide. Where else on the lake is it 100 yards wide at just 12 to 8 feet? Yeah. And you can just boom, boom, boom. You really dial in on what them fish are doing, and if you learn how to do it, I mean, it'll change how you fish, because a lot of guys just, they're fishing history. They've caught a walleye here, they've caught a smallmouth here, they've got this there, but they don't know why. and they don't know how to find more spots that are like it. And this advanced mapping where you can highlight them spots, you can really just, go boom, boom, boom to all the spots that are the same as what you just caught.
Well, a good case in point, and this is not bass fishing, we're at a muskie trip just the last couple of weeks ago. I went over to a lake that I've only been on a few times in all the years I've been here. It's a drive east of here, and I pulled up a one boat network and I highlighted a bunch of depths and I started running the river channel and we started going up, and I was with another one of the guides here from Hayward, and I'm going up this river channel and they said, we're going to fish here, we're going to fish. And I said, right there, right there, I found a really nice hard break, inside turn, or outside turn, a hard break right off the island. I said, we're going to catch fish right there. And we did. We caught a 43-inch muskie there. So, it does work to just look at the maps and you can pick out the areas a lot of times once you kind of learn where the fish should be. But that's the key thing. You need to learn where the fish should be, whether you're at for bass or crappies or muskies or anything else. If you're not educated enough to know where the fish should be, then you're kind of hunting all over the lake. It's just like with forward-facing sonar now. The guys that get really good with forward-facing sonar are the guys that know where to look for the fish. Otherwise, you're running around the lake shining a beam all over the place trying to find fish and wasted a lot of time. But once you know where the fish should be, you get in there, you can really find them quick, and there probably will be there.
Just last week, I jumped in the boat with a guy. I've been with him quite a few times. I outfitted his boat with the forward-facing sonar. He's more of a novice angler, and I've sent him some spots, and he goes, man, that spot you sent me, I was catching them really good, but now I'm not getting there anymore. The water's cooled off some. Where should I go looking? And, I sent him another spot, and he goes there, and he goes, man, how did you know those fish were going to be there? I caught them there. I said, okay, well, now that you know that they've went from this depth to this depth and this weed to this weed, can you go find another spot on the lake like that? And, a couple days went by and he couldn't find it, couldn't figure it out. And so I had to jump in the boat and show him. And he goes, well, how do you know? And I said, it takes a lot of time and experience, and learning this stuff. You're not going to be able to just slap a live scope on your boat and go catch these fish easily. You got to have some knowledge of the lakes and where the fish migrate to, and it can save you a lot of time because you can go to these spots and go, they're not in this spot. They're going to be maybe in this spot. I'm going to go check it. It's not I know they're going to be there. It's I got to check it, and they're not here. They're going to be here maybe. I'm checking this. Oh, here they are. Boom.
Yeah,
and
well, you
then
can pinpoint them.
You can cover a lot more water a lot faster. Before we had to go pull in on a spot and try to side image and look for them. And sometimes in the weeds, it's a little hard to side image a walleyes or side image a bass or whatever. And you'd have to fish them. You might have to spend 2 hours fishing a spot and changing your lure, changing your color to try to see if, how are they biting. Well, if you're fishing where they're not even at, you're wasting your time. And with the forward-facing sonar, we can kind of eliminate a lot of that wasted time of fishing where there's not even any fish. You can just go, spot to spot till you find them, and then once you found them, then you can dial in your technique.
Well, and you've got forward-facing sonar, but we have side imaging in there at 360, and I maintain that, I could come close to doing what you do with forward-facing sonar with Mega 360. I mean, literally, I can see the fish, and I know exactly where they were, not where they are right now, but where they were, and you can get close enough to get your cast into the fish, where with the forward-facing sonar, you know exactly where the fish are at that moment of time, and you can land the bait really close to the fish. And sometimes being close to the fish is important. You won't catch them unless you're really close to them with your bait.
Right. And as a guide myself, I don't have a lot of skin in the game yet, like you had 45 years. But me, I get a group of guys jump in the boat. We're on a half-day trip. We're on a 4-hour trip. We maybe get 3 hours of fishing in between, tying different lures on and changing spots. That's not a lot of time to really, find the fish in different ways. So using the forward-facing sonar to dial these guys in, teach them how to jig their cadence and stuff, and then get them fishing can save you a lot of time. And then a 3-hour trip without forward-facing sonar, guys ask me all the time. They say, how would you catch the fish without it? I said we'd be doing the same stuff. We just wouldn't know exactly that the fish are there.
That's exactly right. Yeah, you know where they're at.
We know they're there. We're not making 100% of the casts at these fish.
Yeah, so I consider myself a scientific angler, and if I had to start out fresh, the main thing I'd concern myself with is, what type of bait's present and where are they located within the water body, whether this is suspended out deep or making contact to the weeds. And then the other thing is the substrate, whether there's hard bottom to muck. If there's a full moon, there could be a big insect hatch, even the smallies will move out on them. And then, pH. pH is pretty important. I know you guys have been out on some waters that has a lot of weeds, and all the sunfish are suspended out, 20, 30 feet, and they're busting the surface of the water, and that usually happens after 3 or 4 days of really calm, high sun, in July and August. So, and then even barometric pressure and fronts will reposition those fish, so basic, follow the bait, follow depth changes in weeds, and you just keep that in mind. Don't be caught up in any depth, but just follow the bait. And then wherever the bait makes contact with that depth, concentrate on whether it's off from a big flat, a hump, or something like that, and it'll save you a lot of time on researching a new lake.
Well, food is a big deal. Whether you're hunting or fishing, every critter out there, every fish, food is one of their major things that they got to have. And if you're not where their food or food source is, you're in the wrong place.
For instance, walleyes, there's Dr. Dwight down at UW, or actually in University of Minnesota, and back in the late 60s, early 70s, he did a scientific study in regards to the single cones and twin cones of walleye's eyes, and one set's designed to see oranges and the other one's designed to see greens. Therefore lakes with perch will have a good walleye population.
Well, we're talking about where to start out for finding fish, and literally, I guess my thing is that we can rely on the electronics and not do very good, and that's what you're talking about, Noah. But if you don't start to really figure out where the fish are or where they should be, I mean, the electronics it's going to help you some, but it's not going to help you. It's not the magic bullet. I mean, guys that worry about all the technology we've got right now, and yes, it can have an impact on the fishery. It can condition the fish. The fish could get conditioned from a lot of pressure where they're harder to catch, and you're going to have some mortality, and you're going to have some harvest. And those are all factors that we need to also take into consideration as anglers out there, is to be more careful with what we do with fish, how we handle the fish, how many fish we need to take home to eat, on and on and on that stuff. But it's just there's a whole lot of things to be considered on that. But the one thing is that you can go out and spend $10,000 on electronics and still not catch fish, is I guess one of the points I'm trying to make.
Yeah, well, this fall we had a pretty warm fall, and the water temp was probably 10 degrees warmer for mid-October than it has been in past years. So people buying all the new electronics and going to try to fish the last 3 years of history, you ain't going to find them. Yeah. Because the water temp has kept them in their August position, So,
well, Noah, how do you use your electronics as far as let's talk smallmouth bass right now, and you got to know basically where they should be at a given time of the year in the season, where they're going to be shallow or deep, or get an idea where you should be looking. But where do you go from there?
So what I'll do is once I've found an area where there's some fish, and whether it's a rock pile I've side imaged and it's got a nice little ridge that goes down it, or there's a couple bigger boulders that stick out, maybe there's a single fish crib, something like that I know there's going to be some fish around, and I start, I swing back around, throw my trolling motor down, throw my live scope down, whatever, and I start looking. The smallmouth will do a couple things. They'll either just be kind of roaming around, or maybe they'll be tighter to bottom, maybe they'll be a little bit higher up. But once you can kind of see some of those fish, I mean, especially in a rocky bottom where there's not a lot of weeds, they stick out pretty easily. The smallmouth are pretty easy to locate with the forward-facing sonar. Well, locating them is no issue. Catching them is where the issue can be, because they'll want to bite different types of lures. You know, sometimes they're on a crawfish bite, sometimes they're on a minnow bite, sometimes they're on something a little bigger than a minnow bite. You know, they're eating shiners, or they're eating smelt, or they're eating Cisco's, and you got to throw something bigger at them, because you throw something small at them and they'll, you know, smallmouth are very curious fish, so it's not uncommon for you to throw anything at them and they'll swim over and look at it. But just because he's starting to swim over and look at it doesn't mean he's going to hit it. And I've seen this evolve since the forward-facing sonar has kind of come out, where, you know, when it first come out, you could throw just about any lure at these fish and they'd come hit it pretty consistently. Nowadays, you have to be pretty dialed in on the jig head color, the color of the plastic, the size of the plastic, the cadence you're using, you know, the rate of fall, if you're using too heavy or too light of a jig. A lot of different things will change how these smallmouth are biting. And if you really want to catch a lot of these bass, you've got to have basically the entire kitchen sink to throw at them to figure out what they're going to hit.
Ken, you want to add anything to that?
That's very true. And with all that knowledge with forward-facing sonar and how moody the fish can be, the tackle industry is just going crazy. Every year there's something new, and the big boys out on the tournament circuit are catching them off this one bait, and every year it just changes, you know.
Well, they always seem to be, to me, they always seem to be a fish that has got to look at the bait a lot, unless you get more than one fish looking at it. I mean, if you got 2 or 3 or 4 fish looking at it, chances are one of them's going to probably rush in there and grab it. But even then, I mean, one of the guides from up in Ashland, Chris Beeksma, said on the podcast here, he said smallmouth bass fishing is the most boring thing in the world most of the time, because you're fishing so slow and so methodically sometimes to get them to bite. It's like you don't want to move it. And another pro angler said the one thing he tells people with a Ned rig is throw it out there and don't move it.
Yeah, let it sit.
Let them think about it. And they'll a lot of times with the bass too. I mean, they'll rush over and look at your bait, and then you'll see him swim off as soon as he gets close to it. But you know, he might swim off, but he might go 20, 30 feet away, and it's still sitting there, and he comes back to check on it. You know, he goes, maybe that is something I could eat. You know, it's still there. You know, a lot of times I see a lot of anglers fishing, you know, they'll throw it out there, drag it along the bottom, and they move too fast. If that fish is going to come back and reinvestigate it, and your lure's not there, well, he ain't got nothing to eat.
Well, it's just like largemouth bass fishing and smallmouth too. There's a lot of people think, bass fishing, spinnerbaits. Okay, we just throw a spinnerbait out there and wind it straight in. And yes, it does work at times, but the minute you start stalling that spinnerbait, letting it go add vertical to the presentation, drop in up and down, or working it crawling across the bottom, now all of a sudden it changes everything. So that's a bait that's, I think, whether you're fishing pike or muskies or bass or anything else, it's one of the most versatile baits, because you can do just about everything with that thing.
You know, you think back about, 10 years ago, the stand-up jigs started coming, with do-nothing worms, and a lot of largemouths were caught on weed lines with that presentation, and all I do is just throw it out and just dead stick it, and then they come out with these floating worms. Well, Dan Ivanhoe, this was back in probably 92, 93, he come out with a floating worm that would, float with a 2-aught hook on the surface. Well, a lot of guys were using them on stand-up jigs.
Well, I know guys that I fished with in bass leagues and stuff. They'll be working a jig or something, but they'll also take like a Cinco worm, throw it out off the side of the boat, and set the rod down and watch that rod while they're working the other rod, and they'll get hit on the bait that's just sitting there dead sticking, doing nothing.
I've had it many times in the boat, where I got clients in the boat, and we're trying to catch some largemouth. I got people in the front that are fishing pretty fast with wacky worms or with jigs or something, and you get the guy in the back of the boat, he offer, you say, hey, you want to come to the front? I want to sit in the chair in the back. He's sitting in the chair in the back. He's fishing super slow. He's letting the trolling motor drag the boat as I'm moving down the shoreline at, a quarter mile an hour. And then he's catching more fish and bigger fish than the people in front of the boat, just because his lure isn't moving as much.
Talking about what these fish want to do, I mean, we talked quite a bit about forward-facing sonar, and the one thing I've found with that is it's taught me more about fish behavior than I ever thought on stuff over a short period of time, because once you get that and you start watching these fish, we talk about fishing fast. I mean, they'll respond very negatively to stuff that moves quick sometimes in front of them. You watch them and you pop that jig and boy, they scurry off real quick. It's like they don't want no part of that. And, I always kid people. I say, it's kind of like, think about it. You got a bait out there. I don't care if you're fishing for bass or crappies or whatever. You got a bait out there. And there's times when these fish are super aggressive. They're going to eat it. But, think about it like if you were in McDonald's or whatever and they brought you out a burger and that burger started jumping up and down about 3 feet on a table. Would you want to eat it? I mean, it's not it's not a natural thing for the fish to see something moving that fast a lot of the time, I think.
Right.
So,
right. And that whole fish behavior thing, it comes down to looking more natural. And with that live scope, you can really notice how fish react, like you said, in your fish behavior, how they react to your lures and how your cadence and your presentation. The smallmouth, I mean, sometimes on lures I use real lightweight and I let it sink super slow. If you even put some tension on that line to where that lure starts to sink slower, or you open the bail some more and it starts sinking faster, they won't hit it. They won't hit it if it changes. Sometimes the way it is perfect. And with the walleyes, this isn't just for bass, but with the walleyes, I mean, I tell people this all the time. When you're jigging minnow or you're jigging a sucker or something, a lot of guys are using the full length of the rod and they're snapping their wrists and they're moving their whole arm. Then I start to show them. I said, here's your lure on the screen. Start doing your jig. I go, did you see how much your lure just moved? It just moved about 5 to 7 feet. They ain't gonna hit that. Use just a little bit of your wrist action. Move that lure, 8 to 12 inches each pop. Watch. Oh, there's one coming. He's coming for you. He's coming for you. Keep doing it. Oh, he's got it. Stuff like that. But then he starts jigging the way he was before. And he sees that lure move 7 feet away from that walleye that was coming after it, and that walleye just goes right back to the bottom and lays down. Now he knows how to jig. Now he's learned that the way he's been doing it is wrong.
Well, yeah, it kind of reinforced that. A little story I could tell you here in all the years I've been guiding. There used to be an old guide who was one of the only old guides that ever took the time to go fishing with me and maybe show me a few things, old Arnie Jewell. And I'd fish with Arnie quite often. And we were out on a lake in his boat fishing crappies, and I was the young guy, and I had this brand new fancy Zebco ultralight rod and open face reel, and I'm up in the front of the boat. We're fishing little plastic tube jigs, and I'm up in the front of the boat, and I'm trying to make this thing look real. I'm jigging it and twitching it, and I'm doing all kinds of stuff, and I hear this splash, and I try to look, and he's winding a crappie in, and I go back to my jiggling and stuff, and more splashing, another crappie, and after 3 or 4 of them, I just kind of turn around and walled my line in and sat down, and I watch him, and he dropped that jig down to the bottom, that crappie jig, and he'd pick it up about a foot off the bottom, and he'd set the rod down, and he got his oars, and he'd start rowing the boat, and he'd watch that rod tip and start to go down, and he'd pick up the rod and set the hook. And I knew that after that point, especially with crappies, for instance, I didn't move the bait that hard. But until I got the forward-facing sonar, I didn't see the negativity of what that bait jumping up and down in front of them would do, because these fish literally, if it's crawling up real slow, they'll follow it up. They're looking at it. But if you let it drop real fast or you jig it up real quick, they move off real quick. So, just in the presentation alone, no matter what you're fishing for, and we're talking bass here on a bass podcast, but no matter what the presentation is, it's important that you sometimes have to go real slow.
Right, and as a kid growing up, my grandpa, I might have been 8 years old. We go out fishing, and he puts a minnow on, and I've got some kind of plastic minnow on or something, and I'm he's sitting there with his rod sitting still. We're waiting for walleyes. It's nighttime. He's not jigging or nothing. And he goes, well, you got no live bait on. You have to jig. You have to, you got to make that plastic look real. Well, this is stuff that we didn't know. We didn't know any better. That sometimes they don't want that moving around too much.
And sometimes like they do
with the crappies. Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I get guys in the boat and I tell them drop the jig down just about 10, 12 feet and then just hold your rod still, because the crappies, they really don't like that lure moving around too much.
I know, it's not just crappies. I think it's a lot of different fish out there too, and there's a lot of other factors involved there too when it comes to catching fish. I mean, it's the accuracy, casting. Everybody talks about over the years being accurate with a caster. And how many times have you been guiding where you're guiding bass? You say, okay, there'll be a bass in that tree over there, and you want to cast it. The one that casts is over here 5 feet, is over here 10 feet. It never does get close to the fish, and they don't catch the fish. But, I've seen times where I had to lay a spinnerbait right within, drag it offshore almost to catch fish. And people, if they're not good casters, they can't duplicate that. So, and that comes down to the strike window on the fish. I mean, I believe, especially with bass, smallmouth and largemouth, sometimes if it's not within, 5 or 6 inches of them, they're not going to respond to it.
Yeah, just to be more creative on the water, there are times that myself as being an old school angler that I'll use old school techniques. One of them that, boy, there are times when methodical angling will outperform any other ones, but here's a few that I've had great successes. One of them is snapping a tube, a stupid tube, and you snap it, and what happens is it snaps off the bottom and it spirals back down to the bottom of the lake, and then it hits, and then so you'll get the fish to come and investigate, and then it snaps again and then spirals back down. So they're biting that probably on a reflex bite, not necessarily for something to eat.
Well, yeah, reflex bite is an important thing.
And then, jerk baits, they can work all year round. When the pH gets really high and you have some wind or a storm, a lot of fish will go up on top of these flats, even the smallmouth, the largemouth especially. Chatterbaits will catch the dull rags out of them. Rattle traps, sometimes spinner baits if the water has a little bit of algae bloom, a little color to it. But old school reaction baits, even mid and shallow diving crankbaits can really catch them, but they're environmental driven presentations that can really, you can have some of the best fishing days on the lake.
Well, talking about the reaction baits, so Ken, what do you think of? What's the percentage of time they'll travel more than a short distance when they respond for a reaction? Are they going to travel 10 feet forward a lot of times, or are they more likely going to travel, if it comes within a foot of them or 6 inches or whatever?
Well, notation, figure 5-6 feet. When they're protecting the territory, 12 inches.
Oh, yeah. Okay. And I know you throw a lot of the same baits, reaction baits too. I've always said that too with most fish. You got 2 ways you're going to catch them. One, they're going to react to or be triggered by something in their face or something that gets them to snap at something. And 2, they're actually eating. They're looking for food. They're eating something. But a lot of the fish, I think, and the more pressure we see on the lakes, the less likely you're going to get them to that reactive strike, and more only the hot periods of time when they're really feeding heavily.
Yeah, no, smallmouth, they'll travel a little further in clearer water. Basically, if you just have the mentality. So if you got one smallmouth following it at 5 feet, and all of a sudden you picked up 2 from the side, one of them's going to bite it. Well, you might have a single smallie follow it for 20 feet and never touch it.
I know we've got some tremendous smallmouth bass fishing all across northern Wisconsin, and we talk sometimes about the UP, Michigan, northern Minnesota, and clear into the Dakotas, and they get up into Canada now. It seems like the smallmouth fishing has got better and better and better in most places.
Some of them western states are really getting to be known as good smallmouth factories.
Yeah, out in like Montana, there's that what's that big reservoir lake up there?
Yeah. Well, they get in some places they're getting some really big fish too.
Fort Peck,
yeah. Fort Peck is just loaded with them, and
trout
Fort Peck
too.
has got a wide variety of fish, like you said, lake trout in there too.
My brother caught a 48-pound or 48-inch northern out there 2 summers ago.
Yeah, I know.
South Dakota, Lake Oahe, just loaded with them big smallmouth. They had a Bassmasters Elite event out there that people were shocked at the size of the bass that some of those guys were bringing in, out of South Dakota.
Well, it all has to do with the forage base too. I mean, you look at Chequamegon Bay. Chequamegon Bay's got to be over 21 inches to keep a bass, but it's still, they just don't catch a lot of them over 21 inches. But Now you go over to Green Bay and over in that area, and they're seeing a lot of those 6 pound and even 7 pound bass over in there. And sometimes, I actually was it Matt Steffen was on the podcast here.
Yeah.
Not he felt that there was a possibility that we could possibly be seeing a new world record on the smallmouth. Even there's some giant bass coming out of these, and a lot of it has to do with the food source. Even right here in the Hayward area. I mean, we've got lakes that have these just tanker smallmouth in them, and you got lakes that got lots of smallmouth that are maybe long, but they don't have the body to them, and then you got lakes that have smaller fish, and I think it all has to do with what the food source is.
Yeah, and then the weeds, if you keep chemicals out of the lake, the fish will do a lot better.
Food source plays a pretty big role. Here in Hayward, we don't have a lot of bigger bait fish, like the Cisco's and the smelt.
Or gobies.
Or the gobies. We're missing out on some of the bigger bait fish. So the fish, they're eating a lot more bugs, and they're eating a lot more, bluegills and perch, and a lot of fish that are hanging around the weeds. They're eating crayfish in the weeds and stuff. You go to a different system that has a lot of Cisco's and a lot of smelt and a lot of different style of bait fish that are bigger. Some of those fish live in different areas, even though, let's say, Hayward Lake, has a lot of the same structure as a lake, towards Minocqua or something. The walleyes on the Hayward Lake, this time of year, they might be in 14 feet of water on a weed flat or a weed line, and we're fishing a jig and a sucker. Some of those guys I've talked to out on, different area like in Minocqua, some of them walleyes are catching in 45, 50 feet of water suspended or down towards the bottom, because that's where their main food source is. That's where the Cisco's are. That's where the smelt are. That's where those fish are feeding. Our walleyes here in the Hayward area are feeding off of what's living in the weeds. So you've got to fish differently depending on what style of food source those fish are eating in that system.
Yeah, there's a lot to consider there. Fishing is always a challenge to me. That's like, when I started guiding, the reason was it was always a challenge trying to figure out what the best patterns are, and you're not always successful. I mean, no matter, you could think you're the best angler in the world, you are not, and you're never going to be the best angler out there. Period. I mean, you're going to have days where you don't catch fish, Ken. I mean, it happens to anybody.
Yeah, yep. I've done pretty poorly some days when you think you have it all figured out, and then environmental conditions switch overnight, and it's like it's a whole new ballgame.
I remember, so a classic one that I talk about a lot of times was I was over to Camp Fish when in Fisherman had it years ago, and I was over there helping a guy done stuff, and they had Mr. Walleye, Gary Roach, up there, and he was doing a little talk or something, and somebody said something to him once. They said, you ever get skunked out there? And he stood there for a second, kind of looked and kind of scratched his beard a little bit and said, no, I don't think I've ever been skunked ever. But he says, occasionally I do run out of time, though.
Yeah.
There's just so many things to try, and how do you know where to start? And that's why I'm trying to ask Noah here. What, when you find the fish, I mean, what's your go-to bait to start with, and what are you gonna try to go to from there?
There's a couple main techniques I'll fish for smallmouth. One being a crawfish presentation, whether it's going to be a bigger crawfish presentation like a football jig, or something smaller like a 2.5 to 3 inch tube, something smaller to represent a smaller crawfish. Smallmouth eat a lot of crawfish, and then a lot of times in these clear water systems, even the stained water systems, a topwater lure is highly effective for these bass when they go on a feeding mood. And with smallmouth, like we've mentioned many times, if you got one fish following your lure, he's probably got like a 10% chance of biting it, if he's really not in the mood. But you add 2, 3, 4 more fish looking at that same lure, well, your chances of getting that fish to bite just went from 10% to 80 or 90% chance that you're going to have one strike it. And a topwater lure can really draw in fish from a large area, and you fish that topwater over that same line 5 or 6 times, well, you might have just pulled fish from 100 feet from each side just because of the splashing and the activity. And now, your 6th or 7th cast, boom, you get one. And then you've got activity in the area, boom, you get another one. Boom, you get another one. So I like to fish a crawfish presentation. I like to fish the topwater whenever I can, just about any time of the year, it works great for them at all depths. Don't be scared to throw that topwater out over 25 feet of water, because they will come up and hit it. And the more that you make that fish travel for that topwater and that deeper water, he's not going to want to swim 22, 25 feet to not eat. When he starts coming, he's coming. And then you got to have a minnow presentation. You got to have a paddle tail swim bait or a straight jig and minnow setup. One of the big things that's going around is that mid strolling or the minnow shaking or whatever they call it. The mid strolling or
we mean suspended fish,
suspended
hanging
fish.
A minnow thing.
Yeah, the hanging a minnow thing. That's what I'm talking about when I say you got to have the right color, you got to have the right head, you got to have the right plastic, you got to have the right color plastic. It's got to be the right length. They might want this brand one day and this brand the next day. Those things, when you have fish chasing minnows like that, I mean, one little micro change, the way you have that hooked or something, that could be the difference between that fish stopping and swimming away and him just devouring your bait.
I know topwater. I know you like to fish topwater too, Ken. As I do too, but you got any good tips for them? I know a lot of times in clear water, you'll be throwing a topwater bait, and you fish it faster, or you steady, or you stop and go, or you twitch it. What?
I start pretty aggressive with a walking style bait. The Head and Super Spook is a good one. It's got a good loud knocker. Strike King's got another good one. There's a lot of companies that got good one knockers that the sound seems to draw them up, get their attention. And, sometimes you just have to walk it really hard and get a lot of splash and just dead stick it.
Yeah.
So if they are taking a dead sticking style bait, then I'll go with a popping bait and work it a lot more subtle.
Yeah, a lot of times you clear water, you look out there and you can have 3 or 4 or 5 fish underneath your bait, kind of tracking it, watching it before one of them decides to attack it.
Yeah, then, in regards to when the fish are out suspending, I just refer them to as mopping, because there's, a mop has so many different strands to choose from, and those fish, sometimes you'll run out of mop room because they just won't bite nothing. But casting angle is so important. If the fish is swimming this way and you're coming across his body or coming from behind as a surprise, the distance above them, the color deflection from the sun, all that it has a variable, and that's what separates the Wheelers and the Conleys and the other guys out there that are really good with it.
I think a lot of times with fish, and I've actually seen this before, is that if a bait comes down the side of a fish and it comes from behind him and past the front of him, a lot of times I think it startles them. They kind of respond by snapping at it. Have you noticed that ever?
It could be a territorial bite just to kill it because, you invaded their territory. Or it could be that it's a reflex bite. I'm not sure. But sometimes if you come from behind them at a 45-degree angle and you're coming from underneath them and just as their eye is coming, it's going up. And if you bring it up and then level it off, they'll come chase it. But how can you do that when you don't know exactly when the fish are just sitting there? They're not moving around, and you have to follow them for 50, 60 yards to really figure out, to duplicate something that you found out an hour earlier.
We need to talk about at some point here in the podcast. We're going to talk about some of the sponsors here, and we're from the Hayward area, and we originate the podcast out of here. The Hayward area has got an incredible amount of lakes and water to fish up here, Ken.
Yes, they do. And it's actually, there's so many different water bodies, being from the small lakes to the larger lakes. So the smaller lakes, fishing turns on in April, and you just keep bebopping around the different lakes. There's always bass biting somewhere.
Yeah, you got, and not just bass. It's a tourist area. We've got hundreds and hundreds of miles of trails, and we've got a lot of interesting things to see and do around Hayward. Not to mention, the fishing is it's good in a lot of different lakes for different species of fish.
Yeah, actually, the Hayward Chamber does a excellent job in regards to promoting what we have to offer, around the Hayward area, and I think they're probably the best organizations in what we have to offer. That's why the wife and I moved here.
Well, and there's different lakes too. I mean, we mentioned we have so many different lakes, and we have one of the most unique lakes in the state of Wisconsin, the Chippewa Flowage, which is, I believe, it's the second or third largest inland state lake in the state. Very complex body of water, anything from stained water, almost root beer colored water, to clear water in that thing. It was made up of, I think, 11 different lakes dammed up to create that lake. But it's a tremendous fishery, probably one of the best pan fisheries in the state. It's got a good muskie fishery, a good walleye fishery, a lot of smallmouth in there. They don't necessarily run the biggest smallmouth, but a lot of smallmouth. It's a good largemouth fishery. Actually, it was a tremendous largemouth fishery a few years back, but they tend to concentrate more on the walleyes a little bit more, and that tends to wherever you seem to have a high density of walleyes. It seems like you have less of anything. It's in that sunfish family, whether it's largemouth, smallmouth, bluegills. Seems like they don't jive together for whatever reason.
Well, walleyes are more eutrophic lake, and panfish, they thrive on more aging water bodies. So that's why when you first dam a reservoir, I mean, the walleyes take off like crazy, and then through time, through decay of the forest, that's under the water body, it just seems to turn into more of a metamorphic lake that's subject to the sunfish family.
Well, the interesting thing about the Chippewa Flowage, too, I should mention, is it's 90-some% wilderness. It was designated a wilderness lake. So we got a lot to offer in the Hayward area here. If you're looking for information on lodging or vacationing in the Hayward area here, you can check out the Hayward Visitor and Convention Bureau website at haywardlakes.com. And also, you can go to the Hayward Area Chamber of Commerce, which is haywardareachamber.com. And there's a lot of information there for, planning trips coming up here, or if you just want to, find a place to stay or a lake to fish on, all that information is available up here for you.
Yeah, we're right next to the Schwamigan National Forest. I mean, you can go out there and see elk and timber wolves, bobcats, whatever you want to see, you can see out there.
Yeah, and we mentioned earlier in the podcast here, we mentioned Schwamigan Bay as far as the trophy smallmouth fishery. That's only an hour north of here. So basically, we got so many different places to fish. And I want to talk a little bit more about the technology again. And Noah, I do a lot. You do a bunch. You help people set up or install electronics for people and stuff. And I do a little bit of it, but I also help people to teach people how to use this stuff too. But starting out, how that equipment is installed is crucial, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot of places. You buy a boat from a place, and I'm not saying that a lot of these dealerships and marinas haven't picked up on properly installing some of this stuff. They've gotten a little bit better, but when this stuff was kind of first coming out, and guys are wanting to put 3 to 5 screens on their boats, and these dealerships are just wiring it into the normal wiring harness in the console and up to the bow. The gauge wires is too high gauge of wire, and they weren't getting good power to this stuff, and guys weren't very happy with the quality image they were getting. Well, we've learned now that you need to have separate power wires and even a separate battery sometimes for some of this stuff to get the best out of your equipment. So I've done lots of installations, and my personal guide boat was one of the first ones I ever did that I had a dedicated battery for my electronics, and I personally think that it made a large difference from what I previously had wired into just a starting battery on my motor. So if you're looking to add on more screens and a forward-facing unit and a 360 and all that good stuff, you might want to look at getting a dedicated battery and a lithium battery at that, just so you have a pretty stable voltage across the board on all your stuff.
Well, I know as soon as that voltage starts dropping down, and with the lead-acid batteries, right away, if you've got a lot of draw on there, right away there you'll see that voltage start dropping down, and it'll go from 12.5 volts down to 12 to 11.5, and it just keeps going down. Where I know I've been running the Amped Outdoors batteries. I know you do too.
Yep.
And we see a stable voltage at 12.5 to 13.5 volts the whole time. And it all the way through the entire day, and it seems like the electronics and everything performs better when it sees that stable voltage.
Yep. Right away in the morning, fresh off the charger, I always keep my stuff charged up after using it. It'll read like 13.4 to 13.6, and then it'll draw down to about 13.1 or 13 or 12.9, and that's where it stays. Never seen my lithiums, my amped outdoors go anywhere below 12.7. And if you're starting to read anything below 12 on your lithium, then it's about to die. And when they die, there's no in between, like with the lead acids, when you crank your motor over and your screens flash off.
Yes, dead.
There's none of that with the lithiums. When they go dead, it's instant, boom, nothing.
Yeah, but you could. It's really hard to run them down because I'm running 2 amped 24 volt 50 amp hour batteries in parallel to give me 100 amp hours in the front of my boat for my trolling motor. And I was just recently out guiding some people crappies, and we had that was a day we had 30 mile an hour, I'm saying maybe 40 mile an hour winds. It was crazy windy out there, and the only place I could find the crappies was sitting right out in that wind, and I'm sitting there spot locked for hours, and I came back and I still had 67, 68% left in my batteries. It's just unbelievable that how long they'll last.
The battery technology has come a long way, and I've made recommendations on lithium batteries for guys that plan on doing, trips to, Canada where they might not have access to power for, a few days. And if you want your boat to run, a couple days in a row without being able to charge it, the lithiums are going to be the way to go. Or if you're going to do let's say Lake of the Woods and camp on an island or something, you got a long weekend where you're going to go on a fishing trip, those batteries are going to hold up. Versus the lead acids that'll just draw down a lot faster, especially when you start adding forward-facing sonar with a lead acid battery. I never recommend it just because that black box on the live scope, it seems like it draws a lot of power on a lead acid battery. I don't know what the difference is, but the lead acid batteries, they just don't last as long.
Well, as soon as your voltage goes down, your amperage goes up. So you're drawing more amps at lower voltage, and some people think that if you're running 16 or 18 volts on that equipment, and it will tolerate that, a lot of it will, but they think that you're getting a better picture out of it. You're not, but you're running a little bit more voltage is actually going to have a less amp draw, so your batteries will hold longer because of that, I think.
I've had really good luck with my amped outdoors. For 3 or 4 grass, I just run a 60 volt, 12 volt.
Yeah.
And it works great. Or
60
amp, 12 volt, yeah.
Well, I know my neighbor, he goes to Florida Keys every spring, and I told him to get an amp. He got a 24 volt, just 150 amp hour, 24 volt, and he was down there for a whole month down to Florida Keys, and said he fished hard every day and only charged the battery maybe 3 times the whole time he was down there for a month, so that says a lot right there. You're in the ocean, you're using your trolling motor.
Yeah, I'm pretty big on redundancy, on having a secondary thing to fix, to replace what you've got. And with the lithium, I used to recommend, having 250 amp hour, 36 volts, for your trolling motor, or 24 volts, depending on whatever model you got, just so that if one of them died, you could still run it off the other one. Whereas, with a 36 volt system on lead acids, if one of your batteries dies, well, your trolling motor is not going to work very good on 24 volts. But now, with the such a great experience we've had with these batteries, just a single 50 amp hour, trolling motor battery is I have high confidence that you won't have any issues with it. But if you've got the extra money to spend for the second one, just prevent any issues on the water, go for it, but I don't think it's needed.
And there's guys out there that are using, if you're 24 volts, they're hooking 12 volts in series to get, their 24 volts, but there again, like you said, if one battery shuts down on you or something happens to it, you're dead. Whereas if you got the 24 volt batteries or the 36 volt batteries, you got multiple of those, you can just keep going off of one of the batteries. So
yeah, a lot of people don't think of this. If you're going to run, say, anything over 10 feet, you should run 10 gauge wire.
Yeah.
Some of these boats, you're going to run 22, 24 feet of wire to get it back to your batteries properly, safely.
Yeah, there's a lot to the electronics. We talked about the learning curve and everything else, and where would you tell people? I know YouTube. I've always mentioned the YouTube stuff. There's more instructional stuff on YouTube on learning this electronics and the technology we have now than any place I know of.
YouTube is probably one of the better places to research this stuff. There's lots of guys out there that buy all the products and test them all and compare them all, so you can kind of make the decision on which one you think is best. A lot of good guys out there that have real experience with the stuff that can make good recommendations for you. One place I would recommend avoiding is any of those Facebook groups that you've got. People will always complain on this, or that on all their stuff because they didn't set it up right and it was junk, and they didn't warranty my product, or blah blah blah. Everybody on Facebook, a lot of bad things come from looking through them comments on Facebook, and you try to ask a question. I've seen lots of guys post on a Facebook group and ask, hey, my screen's doing this, does anybody know what's going on here? And all the comments are just like, oh, you moron, you didn't read the manual. Oh, you got this set up wrong. Oh, you're dumb.
Or you got 50 different things that they're telling you that it's wrong.
Or they're telling you, or there's too much pollen in the water. What kind of system are you fishing? Or what's this? Or what's got to be this? You didn't set your transducer up right. Oh, your voltage is too high or too low or whatever. You just get a bunch of nonsense, misinformation from some of these groups. So I would try to find the good information on YouTube, like you said. These guys making these YouTube videos, they're there to make money off it too, but they've got good information on some of this stuff. And when I bought my guide boat and I wanted to outfit it with what I thought was the best of the best, I watched a lot of videos to decide, because I can't afford to go buy a Lowrance 12-inch with side imaging, a Garmin with side imaging, and a Humminbird with side imaging, and to compare all the mapping and compare all the down imaging to figure out which one I like best. I got to watch the videos because, I got to make the financial decision on which one I want. Well, I had determined, and from past experience, I knew that Humminbird Lakemaster had the best mapping in my area, so that's what I went with for my council units. I got Humminbird for my mapping, and Humminbird, I think, is still leading edge on some of the side imaging stuff. Their new Explorer series. Yep. I've played with that new Explorer series. I've installed them quite a few times. I got that side imaging dialed in at 130 feet. I can mark down walleyes at like 120, 130, no problem, in the mud flats where you can see the patches of coontail, and you can see the pot of walleyes sitting in between the two patches of coontail, and you're like, man, that's nice. And I had determined that for that forward-facing sonar, that Garmin is just better. I've used the Mega Live 2 with the new Explorers, and it's a lot better than the Mega Live 1 was, because I used the Mega Live 1 as well. I got the opportunity to play with all three of them actually over the past couple of years and meeting different people. But that Mega Live 2 it seems like it's got a little more latency than the other ones, and sometimes it's still pretty hard to pick up your jig. You see some videos of some guys out there that are sponsored by it, and the videos they've got, man, it really looks like it's really good, but you buy one off the shelf, and I was kind of disappointed with the one that I had installed for a gentleman. Just trying to fish crappie straight up and down, we were having trouble with it, and maybe it was just bad transducer, but I do know that don't be fooled by some of these advertisements, because there is a quality to some of this stuff, and they know which ones are good and which ones are bad. Yeah. And there's a spec, and if it's within that spec, it goes to the shelf, and if you got unlucky and got one of the poor ones, I'm sure it's the same with Garmin. The Garmin videos, you see, wow, you can see the fins flashing on that fish, well, on a lot of the videos on YouTube, they're just blobs, you don't see the fins. And part of that is the setup and the settings and how guys like to run their screen or whatever, but there's a little bit of advertising in there. So like I said, that YouTube where that guy puts three of them on the same pole, on the same lake, on the same day, switching between them on the same rock pile, on the same stump, on the same brush pile, on the same fish, so you can see which one you think is better. That's that's how you're going to make your decision on which one you want to buy.
Yeah, a lot of it is a setup, and I think you're right. I think there's individual units, maybe one better than the other, or transducers. Maybe it's the transducers. One transducer happens to be a little bit better as far as what it does, but I mean, I can't complain with the Garmin stuff. I mean, I was casting crappie jig out the other day, and I'm talking, I fished a split shot above I think it was like 64th ounce jig, and I could see it 50, 60 feet out dropping down through the water column. So, I mean...
Yeah, and I've never had any issues with my Garmin, seeing my crappie jigs at 60, 70, 80 feet. On a nice calm day with that light braided line, I use a Finn's braided line that, 8-pound, 10-pound test still, that's so thin and so smooth. You can really cast some baits pretty far with the braided lines we have now. And I can still see that crappie jig out there 75, 80 feet going down towards those fish and fishing them properly.
Yeah, Finn's has got a new light braid out too, a really nice braid for fishing crappies and stuff. And it's incredibly strong too. So there's a lot of different options out there. And as we wrap up here, I don't know if, Ken, you got anything you want to add to this podcast you're talking?
Though my mind is just going through so many memories, we could talk here all night, but we should save some for the next podcast.
Yeah, we got something every time around. And Noah, I know you do a lot of guiding and stuff. Anybody looking to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you?
You can find me on my website, which is noahglittoguiding.com. You can find my Facebook, which is Noah Glitto Guide Service. Or you can just give me a call or text anytime at 612-616-6287. I've got a Minneapolis area code, but I've been living here in the Hayward area for quite a few years. I've got a lot of history here, coming here as a kid. So I definitely am well versed on the area, and I've been doing very, very good and fishing over the past couple of years. I do want to leave everybody with a kind of a question on that forward-facing sonar stuff. I'm curious what people think about, do we think these transducers have a shelf life? If you've had one of your units for 2, 3, 4 years even, do you think that it's as good as it was when you first got it? Or do you think it's degraded over time and maybe these transducers don't last as long as we thought they were?
I think a lot of that has to do with if you're careful and you turn the power off, because they do get hot out of the water. So anyway, we're going to wrap up the podcast here. Noah, I want to thank you greatly for taking the time coming on here and driving out here and sitting down in my office. As messy as my office is, but thanks for coming in here.
It was a good time. I'd love to come back and chat fishing more and more every day. Like Ken said, just sitting here thinking about memories and stories we could tell. And you could just go for hours and hours and hours talking about fishing. And like you said, I mean, the Hayward area is a touristy area, and we got wonderful fishing. We've got beautiful views. We got resorts that'll take care of you. We got Airbnbs that are nice. We got lots of good food and restaurants and bars. We got golf courses everywhere. We got trails to ride on. We got snowmobiling. We got all kinds of stuff to do all year round, whether it's, middle of summer or middle of the winter. We got activities, we got events, it's the place to be, it's the place to come vacation, it's the place to come hang out and spend some time with the family and go explore the wilderness and do whatever you want to do and get out of the city.
Well, guys.
Yeah, so one last note, Noah is really sharp when it comes to fishing. I have a lot of respect for him for picking up his knowledge for such a short time and a young angler, but one thing that Noah is really good at, he's understanding the skill set of the anglers that come with him on these adventures, but he takes the time to teach and educate. So not only are you going out and have a great experience, but you're going to come away with a lot of knowledge that you can apply on your own boat, different lakes, wherever you go in the country.
Well, I can tell you one thing. I've been 45 years a fishing guide. And yeah, I do catch fish, but I wouldn't want to have to fish against either one of the two of you guys because we're especially for bass, because you guys got it wired down pretty good. Anyway, we're out of time, guys. Boy, I'll tell you what, it's been almost an hour here and been an interesting podcast. We're going to have to get together again sometime and just kind of chew on a little bit of fishing information because, between the three of us, there's a lot of years of fishing experience there, Ken. Probably well over 100 years, I would imagine, or close to it.
Yeah, I think maybe one of these podcasts we should take down some notes or something. We would just sitting down like guys getting back and should be drinking a beer or two, but we're not.
Anyway, thanks a lot, guys. And we'll be back again next podcast with a new episode. Hopefully you enjoyed that. And if you go to our podcast site, which is northlandbassin.podbean.com, and if you go to that website, you can actually leave comments or ask questions if you want, and one of us will answer the questions for you. So anyway, we're going to wrap up on that right now, and we'll be back again with another podcast for you in a couple, 2-3 weeks here.
Well, thanks, John, and good luck hunting to everybody.
Good luck.
Well, folks, that about wraps up this edition of the Northland Bassin Podcast. If you'd like more information on the Hayward, Wisconsin area, check out the Wisconsin Northland Outdoors Radio Show on our other podcast channel, wnoradio.podbean.com, or for even more information on the web at haywardlakes.com or haywardareachamber.com. Thanks for listening, and watch for our next Northland Bassin Podcast. And if you enjoyed the podcast, please like and subscribe to the channel.